Can Elon Musk restore free speech? This is one of the guiding questions I'll be asking in this solo episode of me, Dan Astin-Gregory, today, following Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, the agreement to buy the platform for roughly $44 billion, equating to close to 35 billion UK pounds, promising to make online speech freer and doing what it takes to restore the de facto public town square. Now, this acquisition, this purchase has been met with mixed responses. And in combination with those mixed responses, there has been some quite extreme responses, which will lead me to ask several other questions about what is really going on within society and culture on a deeper level. But can one man really hold the power to restore free speech? Now, we've clearly seen within social media, not limited to Twitter, certainly, we've certainly seen free speech threatened and, in fact, challenged at a deep level over the last couple of years. In particular, throughout the pandemic, we've witnessed an enormous amount of censorship. We've seen critical voices deplatformed. And for those who have been subjected to censorship, it may come as a positive sign that Elon Musk is purchasing Twitter on the premise of making it freer. Now, whatever you think of Elon Musk, he has a prolific record as an entrepreneur, and you can expect some innovation within Twitter. I think, I joked recently that Twitter is in need of an update. People say that it doesn't even have an edit button. And the most exciting update that Twitter has had since its inception, over a decade ago, is doubling the Twitter character count to 280. So you could argue that Twitter is long overdue an update, but the conversation is really centered around free speech. And in tonight's episode, I'm going to evaluate through the lens of the Elon Musk deal, the broader questions around free speech, but also to examine some of the responses to the deal, because it's quite frankly, to me, there is lessons to be learned just by examining the way people are responding to this thing. Now, I know that there are those who are concerned about other aspects of this kind of technological evolution leading towards the increasing blurring of man and machine, so to speak, with Elon Musk's Neuralink project. But quite frankly, whether it comes to, sensors inside the body, microchips, or, digital links towards the brain, the principle for me is about freedom of choice. And technological innovation is moving at such an incredible pace in those worlds that there is really an important question to ask around the ethical and social ramifications of innovation. But that's not the subject of tonight's conversation, but I know that's been raised as a concern with Elon Musk in particular. But I want to center on some of the more cultural observations, as well as examining whether one man can indeed preserve free speech, as I talk more about the online safety bill, which had its second reading in Parliament in the UK last week, but also some really shocking new legislation that is emerging in Europe that, again, is a major threat to free speech. So on one hand, we've got an entrepreneur who's standing up for free speech, taking the reins of a default, an incumbent platform like Twitter, which has, an enormous amount of users, versus the political angle where there is an even deeper threat, really, to free speech. Now, Elon Musk taking over Twitter has produced some gloriously insane responses across social media. Everything from the kind of, reasonable comment that, something like a social media platform is too important to be owned and controlled by a single person. Whilst there is some truth to that, Elon's takeover, people are believing that it's going to radically shift the tone of the platform. People going as far as saying that for democracy to survive, we need more content moderation, not less. People exclaiming that if Trump is allowed back on Twitter, it could be a death blow to the free world. These are examples of a more the extreme sense, but I will continue because it has got hysterical. Because even when it was hinted that Elon Musk could take over Twitter last month, the Twitterati literally went bananas when he secured a 9.2% stake recently. People were literally entering into a doomsday scenario where they were fearing for the future of humanity itself as a result of Elon Musk purchasing Twitter. We have to start to look at these things and examine what's really going on culturally, what's going on psychologically within society at present when we're witnessing these extreme reactions. Max Boot of the Washington Post said, "I'm frightened about the impact upon society and politics if Elon Musk acquires Twitter." People are saying that hatred, racism, actual fascism, real world lethal consequences are what we can expect to see as a result of Elon Musk purchasing Twitter. And to me, this is quite frankly insane. The reaction to his purchase is quite frankly insane. And indeed, it's actually quite revealing about the predicament we find ourselves in right now, and scarily so, that those in positions of influence and power now view freedom of speech as a toxic thing, and that it can only do bad. Now, when I talk about the online safety bill and we explore the ideas around freedom of speech more broadly, of course, we have to look at some of the edges of the bell curve, so to speak, where there is genuinely harmful information, there is genuinely dangerous content, and there is genuine misinformation and disinformation. However, the town square, the way in which people have responded, this public digital town square, the way that people have responded is quite frankly over the top. Actress Jamila Jamal led the charge of celebrities, particularly on the left-leaning side of celebrities, announcing that they're going to abandon Twitter after Musk has purchased it, declaring that she will no longer be tweeting because his free speech would end in lawless hate, bigotry, and misogyny. So again, I'm not sure how people are jumping from the idea of restoring free speech and actually tackling censorship, online censorship, would lead to these insane outcomes. How have people associated freedom of speech with these crazy extremes? This is the world that we're currently living in, and it's actually not so much about left and right. It's more about liberty and authoritarianism, or libertarianism and authoritarianism. And there is increasing slide to this desire for control and power. And we already know that Twitter has played an enormous, and the social platforms are an enormous vehicle for delivering narratives, overarching narratives and themes. And it's the power of that narrative creation is really in the hands of the most powerful. So on one hand, and this for me is an interesting observation, because you've got the rich and powerful, the elite, the political elite, controlling these narratives and using social media to do so. But you're also seeing the platforms themselves in their own political preferences, despite the fact that they're meant to be open platforms according to previous internet law. You're seeing shifts in the algorithm depending upon their own political views. But we're also seeing the enormous influence of big data and behavioral science across the use of social media. So the social media space is far from free. And the fact that Elon Musk has purchased Twitter may be a positive sign for freedom of speech. Maybe it's not, but at least someone is willing to stand up and tackle the aggressive pursuit of the cancel culture they're witnessing and the censorship. But the idea that doing so would lead to these hysterical outcomes is quite frankly beyond my imagination. And it really does speak into the crisis of meaning that we are experiencing as a society. So not only do we have a genuine crisis of free speech, where there is this clampdown on critical voices, we're also seeing this real crisis of meaning playing out in people's behaviors. And really the way that free speech is being tackled amongst the response to Musk is an example that has thrown up this illusionary trade-off between freedoms and safety, because the online safety bill, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment, really is playing into this illusion. And it's a worrying trend that we've witnessed firsthand over the last 2 years with the pandemic, that people are willing to trade off their freedoms in order for this illusion of safety. And this is playing out now in the world of the digital space. Now, I will say, I mean, he hasn't really got into the driving seat yet, but he's already done a good service, Elon Musk, for freedom of speech already. He's highlighted just how deeply in crisis it is. And his moves on Twitter has exposed the depth of fear and loathing felt by many in today's elites towards the idea of unfettered free speech. And what the meltdown that we have witnessed confirms is that there are a lot of people out there who are determined to wield their cultural power and protect their cultural power, and they will not accept any criticism of their ideologies. They want to shut down dissent. They want to shut down skeptical ideas or any commentary that challenges the dominant narratives. This is abundantly clear, but an also worrying trend as we see this growth of these digital platforms and the way that now so many billions of people have these digital platforms in their hands. The power over these platforms is really quite shocking to see. And these social media oligarchs are determined to share their worldview in a way that is free from question. And it's quite clear that people are now fearing what happens when you allow freedom of speech and what impact that could have upon these dominant narratives. I'll take a quote from Brendan O'Neill from The Spectator, who's commented on this recently, saying that the Musk haters have revealed their true selves. They've exposed their authoritarian, jealous desire to elevate their beliefs above the realm of freedom and contestation. And they are far greater, these individuals are a far greater menace to society than Elon Musk could ever be. And I can't help but agree that this clamping down of free speech, this rise of authoritarianism, the totalitarian bills that I'll speak about coming forth that threaten the public space when it comes to the digital realm, we're in a really rocky place at the moment as a society. And there is struggles for power. You know, can Elon Musk restore freedom of speech in the face of what I'm about to share with you in terms of the online safety bill and the European acts that are coming through? And inevitably, this will spin off into the world space in this increasingly global world. It's really a worrying place. We have this beautiful technology that enables us to actually communicate with the world, yet our ability to communicate is being harnessed, it's being chained, and it's being suppressed. And my worry is, despite Elon Musk, will he have the power as a single individual to up-level freedom of speech? I quite frankly doubt it. There is going to be a power play amongst the private elite and the political elite playing out over the next few years. And my lasting message through this, as we get into the conclusion, as I've after I talked about these online bills, is that citizens, we the people, unsurprisingly, must be the ones that create these cultural shifts and not leave it to these power plays amongst the elite. But it is interesting because people talk about the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, but the reality is, whilst there is a lot of reality to what those accusations are of the influence that these organizations wield over society, I believe, and I've always said this, that the market itself, the economic forces, will start to shift and create adjustments, and that not every elite in the world is going to subscribe to the ideologies of the WEF and Klaus Schwab. And Elon Musk, he kind of bridges the gap, really. He's kind of partly in that world and partly out of that world. But I think what we will see is these shifts in power, those who want to defend free speech and those who want to clamp it down. I think as it becomes more polarized in this way, we'll see a greater opposing force, which will actually lead to many more people standing up for freedom of speech in positions of power and influence. But again, we cannot allow the world to be dictated by the whims of the most wealthy and powerful in the world. I know that's how life has always been, but isn't it about time we change that a little bit? Isn't it about time that people like you and I actually had a greater influence on the trajectory of our society, culture, and the world and humanity itself and the planet that we live on? I think it is. That's my ultimate conclusion. Yet we're facing these challenges, and they are challenges. These new bills, these new threats, these new authoritarian mechanisms that effectively seek to remove the power from the citizens to make their own decisions and our ability to think for ourselves and have this dominance of the accepted worldview that is positioned by the few. I'm sorry. This is the time to create change in the world. Every move towards the suppression of people, I believe, will create the conditions for the revolution of the people. But before we talk more about that and we get into how we create change, I don't have the answers on that, by the way, but there are people out there that are starting to, alongside myself, who are starting to think about these things. But it's important to recognize that on one hand, we've got Musk pushing forward for free speech. Yes, how that will play out, we don't know. But on the other hand, we've got the political powers that be increasingly trying to clamp down on free speech. Now, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced on Sunday that Kremlin-backed RT, formerly known as Russia Today, and in fact, this is way back now. This is actually old news. That the RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik would be banned in the EU, but the European Federation of Journalists fears that this spiral effect of censorship of freedom of expression in Europe will continue to play out in ways that will have unpredictable consequences. But basically, the European Commission has banned the Kremlin's media machine in the EU. The state-owned Russia Today, as we've witnessed, has been banned. But the way it's termed is as follows: that they're saying that these Russian entities, will no longer be able to spread their lies to justify Putin's war, and developing tools to ban their toxic and harmful disinformation in Europe without providing any more details. Well, it doesn't really start to sound like a fair fight. Now, we're not going to get into the notion of the war in this conversation. It's an atrocity, yes. But in order for us to make sense of what's going on in the world, if we only see one side of the story, are we ever going to get to any semblance of the truth? Now, it's true that Russia has a history of propaganda. You can't deny that. But then isn't it also true that the Western European, the NATO-led side of this story is also riddled with propaganda? So if we're going to censor one form of propaganda, why don't we get the whole hog and just tear it all down and take down the propaganda and the misinformation and actually pursue truth? Wouldn't that be an interesting thing? But Michael Bang-Peterson, who is a professor of political science, said that Western restriction of free circulation information, including Russian state media, seems wrong on the basis that, one, it defies the values that we defend in Western culture. Two, it limits Western citizens' understanding of the Russian narrative. I've already touched upon that. And again, in order to have a fair assessment of the situation, surely we need to see both sides of the story. And three, it leads to retaliation that Russians will limit access to truth. Well, it's true. So, taking YouTube down in Russia, for instance, in this case, means that the Russian citizens won't have any idea beyond their own borders what's happening in the world. So we've just got this blanketing of information that serves who exactly? But believe me, this is old news. It gets worse because the European Parliament and EU member states reached a deal this weekend on the Digital Services Act. Now, the Digital Services Act is somewhat akin to what we're witnessing in the UK with the online safety bill, which I'll talk more about in a minute. That had its second reading in Parliament last week. The Digital Service Act, I'll call it the DSA, is a landmark piece of legislation. It's going to require tech firms to quickly rid their platforms of illegal content. And failure to comply with these rules will result in fines of up to 6% of the company's annual revenues. We're talking millions and billions in fines if they fail to remove this content. Now, this is far from cut and dry in terms of what illegal content may be deemed, and I'll talk more about this. But the European Union agreed upon this new digital regulations at the weekend that's going to force tech giants like Google, Meta, Facebook to police illegal content or what's deemed to be illegal content on their platforms more aggressively, or else risk multi-billion-dollar fines. Yet this act claims to ensure a safe and accountable online environment. Again, your safety is our prerogative. In that respect, this bill is very similar to what the UK online safety bill is seeking to do, in so much that it uses the veil of safety to increase the amount of power that central authorities and governments have over online speech. Now, the EU has been a little more subtle about it, and it's kind of sugared the pill with some measures that may indeed be somewhat useful, because there is, let's be honest, there is some dodgy content out there that is genuinely harmful. I got a young child now. There's stuff in the world that I wouldn't want him to be exposed to. But the whole conversation about who should be in control of the information is an important one. And what role do I have as a parent? What role do I have as an individual in monitoring my own use of the internet? Why should someone come and place rules in that take away my own power, my own sovereignty to make my own decisions, which is essentially what's happening. But as a parent, isn't it my job to guide my child in terms of what is reasonable information on the internet? Yes, of course, there are dark forces out there that we all must be wary of, but of course, we also must maintain, surely, our own agency and sovereignty in the modern world. It seems that people are so willing to exchange their sovereignty for this illusion of safety. And make no mistake, the Digital Safety Act in Europe is no less of a move to exert greater control over the public square, as is the online safety bill. This bill is going to upgrade the ground rules for online services in the European Union. It will ensure that the online environment remains a safe space, safeguarding freedom of expression and opportunities for digital business. I'm not sure how you can have that trade-off of shutting down the online sphere and supposedly safeguard freedom of expression. It's a difficult balancing act, I do acknowledge, but it feels like a straw man. It feels like what is illegal offline was already illegal online anyway. The emphasis on disinformation is a clear giveaway in these bills, as it's an arbitrary designation and not necessarily related to national laws. And the definition of disinformation itself is increasingly subjective. So in other words, anything the EU deems to be disinformation must now be censored. A key part of the legislation would limit how the digital giants targets users online with advertising. This could be a positive step. They have been using our data in egregious ways for many years to sell to us. But again, the decisions that are being made are based around things like gender, race, and religion. Now, my wife's a personal trainer that specializes in creating bodily transformation for female entrepreneurs and leaders. She specifically chooses to work with females. Therefore, if she was to create an advert online, she would want to be explicit in her advertising that she only works with women. But no, you can't do that. In the whole gender wars now, the culture wars, you can't be that explicit. But now they're making it even harder to target people online using things that would be relatively arbitrary, surely. Now, targeting children with ads may be prohibited. That could be a good move. But again, what about television? You know, there's so much product placement and advertising. I mean, you watch any form of television for kids and it's just like riddled with the next toys. I'm already like developing like this immunity, like just this heightened awareness of how much our children are bombarded. But that's a separate story. It's not for today. This is about how the powers that be are trying to limit the way that tech platforms use information. But the reality is advertising is one thing, but let's be quite frank. Throughout the pandemic, the governments used advertising throughout, and it was propaganda. So where is that? Who's regulating the use of governments? The governments are clamping down on the tech platforms, but who's regulating the regulators? Who's regulating the government? It's giving them a free pass to do whatever they wish. Now, the European Federation of Journalists General Secretary Ricardo Guterres expressed a number of key points around this bill. First of all, this is to quote, it should be remembered that media regulation does not fall within the competence of the European Union. We believe the EU has no right to grant or withdraw broadcasting licenses. This is an exclusive competence of the states. In our liberal democracies, it's independent regulators, never the government, that are allowed to manage the allocation of licenses. The EU decision to completely break with these democratic guarantees. For the first time in modern history, Western European governments are banning media. This is a real concern. We surely must be concerned about the amount of power that has now been accumulated by state powers. And secondly, Ricardo goes on to say the total closure of a media outlet does not seem to be the best way to combat disinformation or propaganda. He said the act of censorship can have a totally counterproductive effect on the citizens who follow banned media. And in the opinion of the European Federation of Journalists, it is better to counteract the disinformation of propaganda by exposing their factual errors or bad journalism by demonstrating the lack of financial or operational independence. Well, wouldn't that be a good thing? Just to actually, have an even keel where you're actually logically, debating rather than taking an ideological position or shutting it down. Wouldn't that be magical? We've lost that ability to debate online, but we're going to really lose it if the ability to actually share information that is contrary to the main narratives, the dominant narratives of the world. If we cannot do that, then we have no freedom of expression. Now, so this is happening in Europe, and in parallel to this, the online safety bill in the UK is now being introduced to Parliament. It had its second reading last week, and ultimately, it seeks to make Ofcom the ultimate arbiter of online speech in the UK. Now, the head of Ofcom is a government appointee, so in effect, this is a way of granting UK state dominion over the internet. Again, state power over the internet. This apparent assumption that the government, via Ofcom, is better qualified to tackle these things than tech firms is highly questionable. Now, the tech firms' ability to govern their own platforms is also questionable, which puts the question in my mind of, wouldn't it be great to empower the people to make the decisions for themselves about what they want to consume online rather than treat them like children, which interestingly is actually a function of the online safety bill. Quite worryingly, the bill itself, I'm going to find the part here because it's really ridiculous. It requires online content providers to treat every user as though they are children, unless that they prove otherwise through age assurances, such as age verification, which essentially means entering your driving license or passport or credit card to read anything that could be deemed adult information. And again, we're not just talking about pornography here. We're talking about adult conversation, because now anything in this whole realm of what's suitable for children, what's not suitable for children, is subject to the whims of the government. And it's also, by the way, another step towards digital ID and authentication, another totalitarian step towards Big Brotherism. So you're going to be treated like a child by your government. We know what that feels like. We've been treated that way for the last 2 years. But the online safety bill is set to rip up the rule book as far as traditional British free speech standards are concerned. And this is essentially a censorship charter that will give state backing to big tech censorship on a scale that we've never witnessed before. Now, I mentioned children. Well, of course, the talk of protecting children has dominated the debate so far. I think, there are legitimate concerns there around what children are able to access. But again, what is the role of the state, the tech platform, and the individual, the parents, the child themselves? This is a much bigger conversation than simply blanketing people's access to the internet. But it is probably the most compelling argument put forward so far to reforming online legislation as the digital world has become a more profound, or more profoundly intrinsically connected to our day-to-day lives. But again, how much how much of that power do you want to devolve to the state over your own ability and your own choices as a parent? I, for one, would like to have the choice as a parent how I choose to parent my child and help guide them when it comes to their own online activity. But this discussion around the online safety bill, around the impact on children, completely mischaracterizes the bill and obscures its entirely ginormous scope, which is much more threatening. But on this part of around children, do you think that Silicon Valley corporations overseen by politicians really are in the best position to judge what is best for your children? There is a real danger that this is going to simply outsource parental responsibility to faceless corporations and regulators. This is just the trajectory that we're on, people. This is worrying. This is worrying to me as a new parent. I don't know what you feel. Let me know in the comments. But perhaps the most egregious part of the bill, full stop, is the way that content deemed to be harmful to adults is basically as unilaterally determined by Parliament. So under this prospective legislation, government would have the power to designate content of categories of content as misinformation or disinformation. They've already started doing it. What they say goes. In other words, even legal material, completely legal material, can be banned by the government at a moment's notice because they decide it's not the truth. Now, I know that having studied the pandemic response the last couple of years, the politicians were far from unfit. They were far from fit to make reasonable judgments about what is credible information. We've seen the censorship of all kinds of information that's led to egregious harms. People, the suppression of the vaccine adverse reactions, for instance, is just now, it's astronomical. There's a paper this week that showed the amount of heart conditions within the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated there's an unparalleled gap between them now. It's just all of that information was taken offline because it's for the greater good. But now larger platforms under the threat of large fines will be required to remove such information. We've already seen it within the pandemic, but you can just expect this around a whole broad stroke of categories and topics now. And basically, these provisions can allow governments, current and future, to silence debate. And if they don't do what they're told, Ofcom can fine them between 6 to 10% of their annual global turnover. That's billions of pounds or dollars. And furthermore, the regulator has been given the power to demand data from these platforms and imprison their senior managers for years if they don't comply. So the regulator then has unprecedented access to our data. They're censoring profoundly. Big tech will ultimately be forced to censor legal speech and take this uber cautious approach to anything that could be potentially unlawful or deemed as misinformation or disinformation, or else face massive fines and potential imprisonment of staff. Now, it's quite clear that deciding what is legal or harmful or misinformation, disinformation is a difficult job, and it's been proved almost impossible. So the bill's answer is to allow ministers to decide. Come on, people, think about your MP here. Would you allow I'm at the point where I wouldn't allow my MP to decide anything on my behalf. I'm sure many feel the same. But this is the direction that we're going in. The idea that this content, what can be shown online, should be rubber stamped by Parliament. This means the boundaries of online censorship will be politically driven rather than defined by laws governed by human rights and the protection of the freedom of expression. It undermines the independence of technological firms as well as regulating bodies. It's now, the Ofcom who will be told what needs removing by their political masters. But the bill itself gets messier the further you dig in. As I mentioned already, we've got this leap towards digital ID and authentication now, where, it'll be required to show papers in order to access certain information. We've already got this paper society emerging in physical world. It's now approaching in the online world. Now, again, I will be a little bit pragmatic around this. I do get a little bit annoyed by anonymous trolls that have a fake name and a fake profile. It is a little bit irritating. I would rather know that I'm talking to a genuine human being who has a face in a real life and lives in a community somewhere, rather than some made-up online avatar. But then who knows? We're moving into the metaverse now, where you don't know anyone anymore. Anyone is an avatar. It's not who you really are. So on this one hand, we've got this balance towards digital ID and authentication, yet we're moving into the metaverse where no one is real. Huh, crazy world we live in, huh? Now, as I talked about, the platforms will have a duty to remove upon user request anything that they reasonably consider to be illegal. Now, under these new criminal offenses attached to the online safety bill, this will include speech that is deemed to cause psychological harm to a likely audience. Couldn't get more vague if you tried, which is an attempt to tackle what I've just talked about, online trolling. But what this means is you get the rest. It's a recipe for the easily offended. And I've heard the word snowflake used. I don't even really know what it means, but I know it's used in a derogatory sense to talk about the kind of weak-minded. And I'm even feeling the burn of how I may be making someone feel offended and using that term. But as a result, now you could switch me off because you've been offended by what I said. Therefore, under this bill, you could switch me off rather than just do the reasonable thing and say, actually, Dan, I don't agree with what you're saying. And in fact, I don't even like you. I'm not going to listen to you anymore, and make the personal decision yourself using your own intellectual mind to say, I'm not going to consume this content anymore. I don't really like it. No. We're going to go and report you to Ofcom and get you shut down and even have your revenue, as a media creator, take your fines and affect your livelihood. Well, thank you so much. I'm very sorry I offended you. So it's going to put this enormous amount of pressure on platforms to remove this supposedly harmful content, risking these huge fines. And really, we're only scratching the surface of the damaging consequences of this bill. It's going to put huge regulatory burdens on thousands of companies. And the culture secretary in the UK, Nadine Dorries, said that the UK must become the safest place in the world to go online. In that case, we could become the least free. But what's interesting is that many of these overseas companies may simply block access to UK users to avoid the cost of complying with this associated regulatory requirements. After all, this is what a lot of the US blogs, and I'm sure you've come across this yourself, following the European Union's GDPR regulations, you'd go on an American site and it said, sorry, this is no longer available in your area. I come across that a lot of times. I'm sure you probably have as well. We're going to see more of that because it's going to be just too hard to navigate these laws. But, if everyone, but the risk is, as we've seen with the European bill, if everyone starts clamping down on the idea of free speech, then, we're all in for it. Now, as I've said, censorship is a delicate, nuanced matter. There is definitely content online that should not be online. That is for sure. There is things out there that are truly harmful to us and to others. But who has the ultimate power to determine what is harmful? We've reached over 15 million views over the last 2 years. If I sat down, and I don't think we've got 15 million viewers, it'd be wonderful if we had, but if we did have 15 million viewers, you'd have just watched one video each. There's probably 100,000, couple 100,000 of you. If we sat around a table, a big table, an open field somewhere, I don't know, and tried to debate what is reasonable to censor online, I doubt very much it would come to consensus because it's a personal decision. We have different values, we have different beliefs, we have different ideologies, and as such, it's complicated. So in order to navigate that complication, as what happens generally in the world that we live in right now, we just blanketly cut it off through these safety bills. Now, there does need to be a legal means to protect vulnerable people from harmful content online, but that should be clearly and absolutely defined, and it should be done in that kind of manner where we do have an open and adult debate about these things. But also, we just need to give the individual the powers to place their own controls. I should have the power to limit what I see on my laptop if I see fit. If there's types of content I don't want to see, I should have the controls to turn it off. If there's stuff I don't want my son to see, I should have the power to turn that off, rather than the state saying, none of you can see this, which is essentially the journey we're going on. And the deliberate introduction of vagueness and subjectivity into these laws is another clear power grab by the governments. This bill should be scrapped. The European bill should be scrapped. We need a good faith attempt to introduce clear and robust guidelines and nothing more. Let's put the power back in the hands of the people. Let's stop treating us like idiots and actually allow people to make their own decisions about the material that they consume online. And let's do what we can to protect the children and the vulnerable in a more responsible way. So in answer to my opening question, can Elon Musk restore free speech? In the face of all these bills, it's highly unlikely, but more so, hoping that yet another billionaire will come and be the savior, this hero and villain story that we so accomplished, accustomed to kind of getting behind. We've seen it with Russia and Ukraine right now. The idea that there's going to be some individual savior who's going to come and restore our liberties and our freedoms and graciously return us to freedom to do what we will online is not only misguided, but is way too passive. It's incredibly passive. We've got to let go of the idea that there is some savior in the physical realm that's going to come and buy this platform and restore free speech. The reality is there will be individuals doing some smart things in the decentralized world. Watch this space, new platforms emerging that escape these laws. But the point is this: we must cling on to our own sovereignty and agency. We must become the captains of our own ship. Freedom of speech must be a cultural, it's a societal accomplishment, something that we all create together, that we have, use, appreciate, value, and not just simply hope that some rich dude who happens to be running the world of social media is going to rectify for us. The power is in our hands to create change. We just got to claim it. There is work to be done, absolutely, but we should be standing proudly for the power of free speech, of free debate, of free societies, and not introducing even more totalitarian laws. Now, I mentioned about the European journalists. Well, they've stated quite blankly that banning a media outlet in any way is a serious act, which must be based upon clear legal precedent to avoid these arbitrary interpretations. And they go on to say that the challenge for democracies is to fight for the preservation of free speech. And they've put forth some interesting ideas about what could be done in order to do this. Increasing support for independent journalism, here, strengthening the independence of editorial offices, reinforcing the social status of journalists, empowering journalists to actually develop themselves in order to get out there and critically think and investigate, promoting professional ethics through independent free press initiatives, encouraging media pluralism, promoting media literacy for all, increasing the transparency of those in power, which of course never comes up in conversation amongst those creating the rules. And they go on to say that the real antidote to disinformation is not the banning of media, but the promotion of vibrant, pluralistic, professional, ethical, and viable media ecosystems, totally independent from those in power. Here, my friend, it's time to take the power back. It's time to create the change we want to see in the world, which is exactly what our latest brand, the Elevate network, is all about. I would like to invite you to join us as part of our movement. We are standing up for free, open societies within the Elevate network. We want to build a movement that challenges the world that we're facing right now and actually not only promotes and preserves free, open, peaceful societies, but recognizes the power that each one of us has in order to create change in the world. So it's my hope that you will join us inside the Elevate network, join the conversation. We plan an enormous amount of work in this particular field. We're going to run some campaigns around the online safety bill, but also tackle some of the European issues as well. The power is in our hands to create change, but we can't just sit and watch any longer. We have to come together and we have to work hard and we have to create change. And that's a combination of resistance, and it's a combination of reimagining the world we want to live in. It's partly fighting the old, partly building the new. My view is we spend 20% tackling things like this and 80% doing real change initiatives that's really going to build the future. So yes, watch this space. We are going to be doing some physical activations. Yes, we will be doing the festivals over the summer. Watch this space on that one as well. But come and join us on the Elevate network. It's time for us to start having these conversations in the public domain. Let's get offline and let's start having really important conversations that shape the future of our world. Thanks very much. I'll see you again.